Welcome to Fear Street.
I used to work about 30 miles away from where I live. One night, I'd been stuck in heavy traffic coming home. I take Lasix, so after a while I really had to go to the bathroom. I kept telling myself that I was almost home and tried to hold it until I got there. But by the time I got to my exit, I knew I wasn't going to make it. So I pulled up to an area where Fidelity Investments is located and found an area that was isolated. This area is heavily wooded, with walking trails and a lot of game, but it's also in a very populated area. I pulled up a little side drive off one of the main roads. That little drive is about 100 feet long, with only room for one car. It went up in elevation and had bushes on the right side, facing the main road. On the left side there was a guardrail and a view of the valley below. The area up there is huge and isolated, with several buildings that are all spaced out. The place is dark at night because there are intermittent streetlights up there. At night it's pretty deserted too. A few cars go through that area though, because it's a shortcut people use to go from Taylor Mill over to 3L Highway, where there are stores, restaurants, etc. When you're up there, you're above everything around this area. When I stopped, I got out of my car, waited a moment and looked around to make sure there were no other cars. It was winter, so the bushes between where I was and the road below me didn't have many leaves on them. Because of that, you could see right through them. I was up on this little rise, about 20 or 30 feet above the drive, which was 4 lanes wide. To the left of me was a street light and more woods that went down another hill to the main road. I went to the back of my car and did my business. When I finished, I stood up, and all at once, every hair on my body stood on end. I knew I wasn't alone. I scanned the area in front of me and must have heard something behind me because I turned around and there were 3 deer standing there, all huddled up together between my car and the guardrail. They weren't looking at me. They were looking across the road. I looked back over there, and that was when I saw a figure standing between the bushes in front of it and the tree line behind it. It was huge. I stand 5'5". Some of those bushes were about 6 feet tall, but they only came up to about the collarbone area on this thing. Due to the street light to the right of it, about 20 feet away, I was able to get a pretty clean outline of it. It had a large dog-shaped head and pointed ears. I couldn't make out its neck, but I could make out massive shoulders. That's when it growled. It was a deep vibration I could feel in my chest. My body just took over at that point. I'd worked security for years in California, in the music business. As a woman, I have to really work out and train to defend myself. I kickboxed for 8 years and worked out every day. I also trained dogs, mainly Anatolian and German Shepherds. Sometimes I have to establish who's the alpha, and to do that, I get them down, hold them in place, grab them by their ear, and growl until they submit. Then the training can start. So when this thing growled at me, it was just pure instinct. I dropped down to a crouching position and growled, right back at it. When I did that, it stopped growling and started sniffing the air. Its snout went up and it turned its head slightly as it was sniffing. It then took a few steps forward. I was still crouched down on all fours and moved forward, still growling at the thing. When I did that, it stopped. I stood up and kept staring right at it. I never broke eye contact with it. Then, it slowly stepped back into the tree line until I couldn't make it out as clearly as before and started to move to the right of me. The deer were still behind me. They were so close I could have reached out and touched them. I waved my arms and told them to get out of there. When I did that, they went back over the guardrail and took off down the hill. That's when I jumped in my car and got out of there as fast as I could. I felt this thing was trying to circle behind me, and I wasn't going to wait around for that. Do I think I scared it? No. But I do think I confused it for a couple of minutes, and that gave me time to move. I told my husband about what had happened up there, but I didn't tell him exactly what I saw. He'd think I was nuts, and to be honest, I thought I was a little crazy myself, until I saw a picture of a dogman. I know there are other things in this world that can't be explained. I've seen them, but this was beyond any of those things. Since this has happened, I can't take the shortcut through that area anymore. My husband took me back over that way once to see the area, and I was begging him to get me out of there the whole time. I thought I was going to throw up. The wildlife up there has almost totally disappeared. I never see anything up on the hills anymore. The street I live on is only about a mile or so down the hill from this place, and lately, we've seen coyotes on the streets, like they've been chased out, and pets here have started to go missing. We've also seen a large black figure moving through our backyards. The dogs throughout the neighborhood go crazy regularly now, too. People were calling the cops when we saw that large black figure jumping fences. I'm concerned that it has come down the hill after eating everything up there. My wife and I had fallen on hard times and were living with her mom and stepdad on Caldwell Road. I grew up just about 2 miles from there. I always loved going into the woods and still do today. The Cohutta National Forest was my playground growing up. It wasn't unusual for me to disappear into the woods for a few days. On this particular day, my wife, her mother, and I went shopping and were coming home on Highway 2. We were in my dad's F-150 with a brush guard on the front. It was very dark and foggy that night, with Jack's River on our left, about 10 yards off the road. We were about 250 yards from Caldwell, and there was a very sharp curve to the right. When I took that curve, there was something in the road. It was on all fours. I had no choice but to hit it. When we connected, the truck went completely over it. We felt the thunk going over the animal. I stopped to make sure it was dead, as I didn't want it to suffer, and to check the truck. The truck was okay, but when I looked at the creature, it was strange. So I got back in the truck and turned it around, so I'd have headlights to see from. This was the strangest thing I've ever seen. It was black, but not a regular black. It seemed like it absorbed the light, like no light went past it, and I still couldn't make out the animal. It was about the size of a young bear, maybe 200 to 250 pounds. It was clearly dead. The head was twisted back. I believe that the tear went over its neck and broke it. And the eyes were blue, but glassily, the way eyes turn when something is dead. It had long curved claws. The teeth were all curved back and very sharp. I didn't want to freak out the girls, so we went home. The next morning, I grabbed my .30-30 and my .357 and went to take another look. It was gone. I mean, nothing there. No blood, no fur. But there was the impression in the grass where it had been last night. And it looked like something big had come along and carried it off into the woods. I could see where something had walked into the woods. So I went back to my truck and got my trekking bag. It didn't have much, just a tarp, wool blanket, 2 quarts of water, and a little bit of food. Just enough to make it a night or two in the woods. A short camping trip and not a survival situation. So I headed into the woods to track whatever this thing was. I never saw a clear track, just signs. A broken stick here, leaves turned over, rocks that were disturbed from their bed, that kind of stuff. I tracked it about 2 miles to a clearing about half a football field in size. right to the middle, and suddenly, all signs disappeared. I searched all over that field and around its perimeter. There was no sign of it coming out of the field, just going in. That stumped me, so I gave up and started back to the truck. But when I got to the edge of the field, I got a very bad feeling in my gut. I can't explain it any other way. It was so bad that it almost doubled me over. After a short while of collecting myself, I tried to head back to the truck again, but it was the same thing. I know about where I was in comparison to the roads in the area, so I headed towards a friend's house about 5 miles away. I finally got out of the woods just before dark. I told my friend about what had happened, and he told me to never go into that field again, that it was supposed to be cursed ground, a place of wishes and dark magic, and that people have gone missing after going into that field. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't know if the legend of the field is true, but I do believe there's something strange in those woods. The woods are a part of me, and I can never stay out of them, and I'm not afraid of anything in the woods. I would just want to be careful around one of these things, like I would around a bear.
For as long as I could remember, my family had owned this little cabin in northern Michigan. Originally, it served as a hunting lodge for my grandfather and his friends. But when he passed away, my father inherited it. We spent many weekends over there over the years. But once my brother and I left home, the place was used less and less. Eventually, my parents began renting it out to people looking for a quiet stay out in the woods, an Airbnb type of deal. The cabin sits on 20 acres of land deep in the woods. The closest neighbors are half a mile away, and the nearest town is nearly 20 miles away, perfect for those looking to get away from it all. They've been renting the place out for years with no problems at all, until last winter, that is. Last December, a couple requested to book the cabin for a week. Dad doesn't like to rent the place out in the winter, mostly because it's heated by a wood-burning stove that requires a ton of wood to be chopped in preparation, and also because he has to pay someone to blow out all of the snow, and it can be pricey. The couple, a wealthy doctor and his wife, said they'd pay triple if they had to. All the other places they had tried were booked through the holidays, and it was the week of their anniversary. My dad reluctantly agreed and made the necessary calls to get the place opened up. He called me on December 20th and asked if I could drive up to the cabin. It was only about a 45-minute drive from where I was staying at the time, and meet up with the couple. Let them in, show them around, etc. He had come down with the flu and couldn't make it, so I said I would. As I drove down the cabin's long driveway the next afternoon, a winter storm advisory was going on the radio. The roads were clear for now, but there would be 24 to 30 inches of snow by next afternoon if warned. A record-breaking storm for the area, according to the meteorologist. I felt a little uneasy and decided I'd give the couple the opportunity to back out with a full refund if they wanted. With the storm coming, I didn't think it would be wise for them to be stranded up there all alone, especially since cell phone signal in those parts is, for the most part, non-existent, and plows could take a few days to get back to the roads. When I reached the cabin, I saw the shiny black Mustang parked out front and felt a sense of dread that I could hardly describe or make sense of. I had the sudden urge to tell these people that the deal was off and that they needed to go somewhere, anywhere else. Instead, I parked my car, got out, and walked over to greet them. I could tell that they weren't from the area as soon as I saw them. The man was wearing an expensive-looking suit, and the woman had on a fur coat and designer heels. Not exactly proper winter gear for the climate. "Hi, Claire Lane. My dad, the one who owns this place. I believe you spoke to him on the phone," I said as I stuck out my hand to shake the man's, and then the woman's. "Yes," the man said, looking me over. "We really appreciate him letting us stay here on such short notice." He paused. Of course, I'll make it worth his while." As the man who I came to know as Dr. Grant Oswald and I went over the details on their stay, Mrs. Oswald went up to the porch steps and walked over to the window, peering inside. "This place is perfect, Grant," she called over happily. "It's even better than the pictures." Grant looked at me and smiled. I took them inside as we walked through the front door. I breathed a small sigh of relief. The wood burner was going in the far corner of the living room, and the place was nice and warm. My dad's friend Jimmy, from down the road, had already been by and gotten the wood chopped and the fire started. That was one less thing for me to worry about. I showed them around and gave them a little history on the place. They seemed like nice enough people, but I still had a nagging feeling telling me that they shouldn't be here. Before I left, I gave them their out. "Look, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but there's a storm coming. It's expected to drop a couple feet of snow, and you're a long way from any kind of help if something was to happen. If the weather is bad enough, it might be a while before anyone can come plow you out. I'm not sure if it's a good idea for you to stay here given the circumstances." I stared at them carefully as I said this, and saw what looked like an expression of fear or concern flash across Mrs. Oswald's face. "We'll be fine," Grant assured me with a good narrow grin. "We've brought enough food and supplies to last a week, and it looks like there's enough wood out here to heat this place up for a whole month if need be." "Okay. But if you find yourselves needing anything, there's an old CB radio in the back bedroom upstairs. Most of the old-timers around here have them. You might be able to reach someone that way." "We do have our cell phones," Mrs. Oswald laughed. "They won't do you much good up here," I told her. At this, they both pulled out their cell phones and looked at them. No bars. As I left that day, that gut feeling refused to subside, but I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, and I continued on home. It had been 5 days since the Oswalds had checked into the cabin, and every night since, I had been plagued with strange nightmares. It was the same one every time. It started with me driving down that long driveway to the cabin. I would get out of my truck, and that's when I would see the paw prints. Thousands of huge, bloody paw prints all around the property, and leading up the porch steps to the cabin's wide-open door. The door would then slam shut, and I would wake up drenched in a cold sweat. Unable to shake that dreadful feeling, I decided that enough was enough. I would drive to the cabin that day and check on the Oswalds, prove to myself that this whole thing was just some weird reaction to the stress I had been under lately with school and my new job. The ride wasn't bad. The storm had dropped a solid 22 inches, but the plows had been out full force over the last couple of days, so the main roads were mostly clear. I called Jimmy and asked if the back roads had been cleared. He said that they had. So far, so good. I told him about my plans of going to check on the Oswalds, but left out the parts about the nightmares and strange illusions. I didn't want to make myself look crazy if all this turned out to be nothing. He said I was more than welcome to stop by and have dinner with him and his wife, Maureen, when I was finished, and I said that I would. It was nearly 5 p.m. when I arrived at the cabin. The first thing I noticed was that, despite the fact that the sun had nearly set, all the lights were off inside. I put my truck in 4-wheel drive and pulled up next to that black Mustang, which was now partially buried in the snow drift. As I approached it, I noticed the second odd thing. The driver's side door was wide open. When I looked inside, I saw the keys dangling from the ignition. There was snow inside piled on the seat and floor, so I knew it had been like that for a while. As I walked around towards the porch, I saw the paw prints. My blood ran cold. I stood there for a minute just listening, but there was only silence. I walked up the porch steps. The snow was knee-deep, and I could feel it soaking through my jeans. I could see the door was slightly ajar, so I quickly shoved it open with my foot and went inside. The house was ice cold. The wood burner held nothing but old ashes, and I knew that the fire had been out for at least a day or two. "Dr. Oswald?" I called out. "Mrs. Oswald? Is anybody here?" Silence. I went to the hall closet, where my parents kept all of our old yard games and sport equipment, and grabbed the baseball bat that had once belonged to my brother. I don't know what, if anything, I might encounter, but there was a huge part of me that had to get to the bottom of it. I turned on the living room light and looked around. The first thing I saw was that large, overstuffed sofa where my brother and I had spent our rainy nights at watching movies had been completely torn to shreds. Stuffing, bits of fabric, and splinters from its wooden frame were scattered around the room. I treaded quietly into the kitchen and noticed that it had been trashed too. The dining table was on its side, and there were what looked like teeth marks on the legs. The chairs were torn to pieces, and the refrigerator was wide open, half-eaten food and empty wrappers scattered around. This was really, really bad. I knew at that point that I had two choices. I could go upstairs and check the bedrooms, or I could run outside, jump in my truck, and get the hell out of there, and let the police handle the rest. For whatever reason, I felt this overwhelming urge to go upstairs, so that's what I did. When I got to the top of the stairs, I caught a whiff of something rancid and instantly recognized it as the unforgettable smell of death and decay. I peered into the first bedroom and saw nothing out of the ordinary. When I looked into the second bedroom was when I saw it. A leg. A human leg. It was on the floor beside the bed. It was almost completely stripped of any flesh or muscle except for the foot, which was somehow intact. I figured it belonged to Mrs. Oswald because the toenails were painted bright red. I stifled a scream and ran for the stairs. My curiosity had officially run out, and all I wanted then was to get the hell out of there. As I rounded the corner, I put my foot on the first step. I heard a loud crash that came from downstairs. I stood at the top of the stairs and stared down. I saw a large shadow pass by in the light that was coming from the kitchen. Then, I heard the growl. It didn't sound like any animal I had ever heard of, and it filled me with a kind of terror I haven't felt before or since. I ran down the hall and into the third bedroom. The room had belonged to my parents. I shut the door as quietly as I could and locked it. And when I turned around, I saw Dr. Oswald. Or what was left of him anyways. There was a rib cage lying on the bed that had been picked clean, and his head was on the floor nearly 2 feet from where I was standing. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth seemed to be frozen in a permanent scream. The walls and carpet were covered in dry blood. I held my hands over my mouth to keep from screaming, but hot tears began to run down my face. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, slow, heavy footsteps. My heart felt like it was going to explode in my chest. I could hear the thing rummaging around the other 2 rooms, and I knew it wouldn't be long before it made its way to the one I was in. I laid on the floor and looked under the door. I saw the shadow of 2 feet walk by, and then come back and stop in front of the door. God help me. Whatever was on the other side of that door started sniffing, like a dog does when it's caught an interesting scent. I gripped the baseball bat in both hands, but now doubted that it would do me any good. I had a moment of clarity and remembered the CB radio. It was on the floor behind me. It looked as if Dr. Oswald may have tried to use it. I clicked it on and grabbed the microphone. "Hello? I don't know if anybody is listening right now, but I need help," I pleaded, just above a whisper. There was no response. "Please, If anybody can hear me, I'm at the Lane cabin on 7 Mile. Something terrible has happened. I need help to be sent right away. I shrieked into the mic desperately. There was no doubt now that the thing outside had heard me. He began clawing at the door frantically, and I could hear splinters of wood hitting the floor outside. I knew it wouldn't be long before that thing broke through. I finally heard a voice come through the CB, but there was too much static for me to understand what they were saying. I wasn't sure if they had even heard my message, and I was running out of time. The door was only seconds away from losing its battle, so I ran over to the window and opened it quickly. I climbed out onto the roof and looked over the edge. It was maybe a 15-foot drop, but I thought I'd be okay if I could manage to land in one of the snowdrifts. Just then, I heard the bedroom door inside break open. I looked back and saw the creature standing in the window looking at me. I instantly knew what it was now. There was no confusion anymore. It stood there for a moment, regarding me. There wasn't a cloud in the sky, and the moon was illuminating the creature like a spotlight. I could see its thick black fur was matted in old blood. Its eyes were reflecting the light in such a way that they looked like two glowing orbs. It bared its teeth and growled, saliva dripping from its treacherous jaws, its long teeth perfectly capable of taking a person's head off in one bite. I hesitated for a second, and then jumped just as the creature broke through the window and clambered onto the roof after me. I hit the ground hard and struggled to my feet. I heard the creature jump down after me, and a moment later, I was feeling its hot breath on the back of my neck. It grabbed the back of my coat and yanked me towards it. My feet left the ground and I knew it was all over me. Then I heard a gunshot. The creature let out a yelp and fell to the ground, bringing me down with it. It clumsily raced to its feet and ran for the woods. The person who had fired the first shot fired 2 more after it, but they both missed. The creature disappeared into the darkness, leaving a trail of thick black blood in its wake. A second later, there was a long, ear-splitting howl that echoed throughout the forest, and then silence. "Claire?" a voice said. "Are you all right?" It was Jimmy. "It's real," I said quietly, feeling almost in a state of shock. "It's really real." "Sure it is," he replied. "Now, let's get the hell out of here before it decides to come back. I wounded it, but they heal fast. This is the last night of the full moon. Once morning hits, it will return to whatever the hell it came from, at least for a while." I thought it was just a dumb campfire story the old-timers told to scare us kids. "All stories start from a bit of truth," he said gently. He offered me his hand and helped me up off the ground. "Come on, you could ride with me back to my place and stay with Maureen and I for the night. We'll be safe there." "But the people who were staying here, I began to sob. "I'll call down to the station in the morning. I don't want anyone else coming up here right now. Not until morning." I stared out the window as we drove. Neither of us said a word. The nursery rhyme from my childhood played in my head again and again, threatening to drive me mad. Every 7 years, in the full moon's light, there comes a dog who walks upright. Unlucky souls who cross his trail never live to tell the tale. The police listed the cause of death for the Oswalds as an animal attack, and I guess they weren't entirely wrong. Jimmy and I didn't bother correcting them. Sheriff McCoy knew the truth as well as we did. The deep woods hold secrets only the locals understand.